Okay, good evening. The lesson for the night coming from the book of Esther. The topic of the lesson, Esther goes before the king. The golden test, I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. Esther 4:16. We're going to go into the lesson. Whenever you watch a movie and you go out and you come back and you miss the beginning of it and you miss certain parts and you say, well, what happened? Um, and this is the same thing with this lesson. We're going to start in Esther. The lesson is from Esther chapter 4, verses 6 through 16, and chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. So I'm going to read Esther chapter 4, verses 6 through 14. Then I'm going to give you a summary of what happened up until this point. So Hadad went forth to Mordecai unto the streets of the city, which was before the king gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasures for the Jews to destroy them. Also, he gave him the copy of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king to make supplications unto him, and to make requests before him for her people. Haman came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again, Esther spake unto Haman, and gave him commandments unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's province do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, and to make life, and that he may live. But I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. And they told to Mordecai Esther words. The Mordecai commanded Esther, think not with thyself that thou should escape the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether hold thou peace at this time, then shall their enemy enlargement and deliverance arise to Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time? So now I'm gonna take you back to what happened with all this, how all this started. What happened was the king had a feast, and he invited everybody to the feast, small and great, and the feast lasted 187 days. And at the end of the feast, because at the feast he showed all this gold, he bragged on himself, everything that he had done. At the end of the feast, he requested the queen would come because she was beautiful and he wanted to show off to all the people. But the queen refused to come before the king. So the king got mad, and the king cabinet told him and said, look, what she did is not right. She said, all the people see this. He said, this is going to be a proverb to you. You need to do something. So the king took her name was Vashti down for being queen. Then the cabinet said, well, you need to get another queen. So a decree went out to find all the fairest virgins and all the Shushan, the palace, everywhere, bring them before the king. And the king would pick one to take the place of Vashti to be queen. and they brought all the virgins. And when he seen Esther, the Bible says she was fair and she was beautiful, and the king loved her. So the king made Esther the queen. So now we're gonna go into the part what happened about Mordecai later on and Haman, who Haman was. In this story, you had the king, you had Esther, you had Mordecai, and you had Haman. These are the people in this lesson. And in chapter 3, it says, on bring Haman, the king put Haman over everything that he had. And he also made a decree, wherever Haman go, that you're supposed to bow to him and reverence him. And when it came to Mordecai, Mordecai seen it, Mordecai would not bow no reverence Haman. So we're going to go to chapter 2 and said, after these things, the king Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of, he was an Agrodite, to advance him, that he sat in the seat above all the princes that were with him, and above all the king's servants that was in the king gate, bowed and reverenced. And Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor him reverence, nor showed him reverence. Then it goes on, skip a couple verses. Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman. So to see whether Mordecai matter would stand. And he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then Haman was full of wrath. And he thought score to lay hands on Mordecai alone, but he didn't do that at that time. And then what happened was in chapter 2, verses 8, and Haman said unto Ahasuerus, okay, and Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, there's a certain people scattered abroad and displaces among the people in all the province of the kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people. Neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore, it is not for the king profit to suffer them. And it's pleased the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business to bring it into the king's treasurers. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, and his son Hammenax, the Abadite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, the silver is given to thee, the people also, to do what them as it seemed good to thee. In other words, now Haman went to the king and lied. He said, you got these group of people over here, they not obeying what you said. They're doing contrary to your laws and stuff. Something need to be done about that. He said, in other words, they need to be put to death. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll do it and I'll pay you. If you give me the decree, I'll pay you to do this. So it pleased the king. So the king said, do as you say. So the decree went out, and the letters went out to all the 127 provinces that at a certain time, all the Jews, small and great, children, women, men, all would be destroyed at a certain date, at a certain time. And that's where the part of the lesson came in. When Mordecai heard about it, he told Esther. He said, now, God probably put you here just for, in verses 14, it says, who knows whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? In other words, God put you here for this purpose, to save us. So what Esther said, she said, it's been 30 days, I can't go before the king. And it's a law that no one is allowed to go before the king. And if someone go before the king within that 30 days, they would be put to death, except the king point his scepter out to them and he bid them to come forth. If not, they would be put to death. So she said, well, that's what the golden testament said, if I perish, I perish. So what she did, she said, I'm going to fast. She told her handmaids to fast. She told all the Jews, they all went on a 3-day fast. And she said, I'm going to go before the king. And you know, when you come on one accord, the Bible said, when there's 2 or 3 together, God said, I'll be in the midst. And if you had the mind to do something, God would answer your prayer. They all was on one accord, and they all had one mind and one purpose. They fasted for 3 days. They didn't eat or drink. They fasted and they prayed before God, asking God to deliver them. And then Esther went before the king, and the king granted her her wish. And when she went before the king, he asked, what do you want? He said, I give you half of my kingdom. And she said, I want to have a banquet for you and Haman. And so what happened was later on, the king had a nightmare. And he woke up and he asked the chamberlain to come in to read him the chronicles of the laws. And it read that Mordecai had saved the king's life. There was 2 guards at the gate that was plotting to kill the king. And Mordecai overheard it. And when they told Esther, and Esther told the king, and they found out about it, and the 2 were put to death. So Mordecai saved the king's life. So the king said to the chamberlain, well, what was done for this person? And he said, nothing. So at that time, Haman came into the gate, courtyard, and he asked Haman, what should I do for a person that done such a thing? And Haman thought he was talking about himself. He said, well, put him on your robe, put him on a gold ring, put him on your crown, and let him ride on the king's horse through the town, and let all the people see him. So when after he said that, the king said, well, go and get Mordecai and do this. And Haman was mad when he found out it was Mordecai and Haman had to take Mordecai around throughout the city and the town with the robe, with the king crown on, and let the people see him and had to worship him. So later on, Haman came back and Haman made a plot. He said, I'm going to kill Mordecai. So he had a scaffold built to hang him. And he went back and told his wife and his friends, and they said, you build a scaffold where you can hang Mordecai tomorrow or the next day. You can hang him. So they built a scaffold. So what happened was when the lesson comes in, well, Mordecai told Esther to go before the king. And when she went before the king and we had the banquet, she asked the king, said, what do you want? He says, me and my people are here. And in other words, false things is said about us to put us to death. But something that we didn't do. And she said, if we was brought here, we was bound people, it would be a different story, but we are free. And what this person is saying is not true. So the king got wroth. And the king said, well, who said this and who did this? And she said it was Haman. And then one of the men said, well, Haman had built a scaffold to hang Mordecai. So they would take Haman out and hang him. And they took Haman out and they hung him. Okay, and okay, I only read verses 17. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. This is about the fast. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king house over against the king house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. And it was so. When the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, that she attained favor in his sight. In other words, God touched him and gave him favor, gave her favor. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew nigh and touched the top of the scepter. In other words, the king granted her wish, let her come. And she told the king about Naaman, and Naaman was put to death. So God delivered the Jews that day in Shushan the palace and all the prominence. And one thing about the book of Esther is different than all the other books. This is the only book in the Bible where it's not mentioned, the word God is not mentioned nowhere in the Bible. From the first chapter to the last chapter, there's nowhere was mentioned of God in the Bible. All the other books of the Bible, you have God is mentioned in there. This is the only book that doesn't mention God in the Bible. But you see how God delivered his people. They showed you, even though God was not mentioned in the Bible, it showed the acts that God did, how God delivered his people from their enemies. And God would do the same thing for us. If we all on one accord, on one mind, God said, if you will hold your peace, I will fight for you. Is to stand still and see the salvation of God. God will fight for us. We don't have to do anything. All we got to do is hold our peace and stand still. And God will fight our battles. We don't have to fight our battles. God will fight them for us. Just like the children of Israel when they parted the Red Sea and Pharaoh and them went across and was drowned. Just like when Joshua took the people to Jericho and they marched around Jericho and the wall fell and they just